Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us here at the Australian Water Association Water Energy Food Nexus Forum. I'm Amanda White, Manager of Communications and Policy at the Association. With the demand on water resources across the energy, ag and urban water sectors ever increasing, it's a constant challenge to ensure a sustainable water supply for all. AWA believes that to build a water-resilient future, there is a need for greater cross-sectoral collaboration. This is why you'll see various sectors who are high water users coming together both today and at more of our events. These events present a unique opportunity to share interrelated expertise, enable attendees to build relationships outside their traditional industry, and workshop new ways of balancing the nexus. We are lucky enough today to have present for us some of Australia's most influential and engaging leaders across these three sectors. This is the third of the roadshow, and we really thank our speakers for already being present in Brisbane and Melbourne. Today we'll be filming, and so we'll be able to make this available to more people as we go forward. The speakers today will be divided into 3 sessions, each with a discussion opportunity and questions at the end. These sessions are responsible governance of natural resources, collaborative policy and practice, economic growth and the way forward, and that's it. So please take the opportunity today to ask questions. I think a lot of the speakers will be happy to take it throughout and make it an interactive session. So please do enjoy their company. So we hope you're able to walk away from here this afternoon with new knowledge, fresh ideas on collaboration and strong relationships across the sectors. So to kick it off, the chair for today is Dr. Jamie Pittock. Jamie is Director of International Programs for the UNESCO Chair in Water Economics and Transboundary Water Governance. His current work includes developing research programs that link Australian and South African expertise to improve management of river basins, green water and agriculture. He's also Program Leader for the Australia and United States Climate, Energy and Water Project of the US Studies Centre and ANU Water Initiative. Please welcome Jamie.
Amanda, thank you. I see. Sorry, what am I doing here, Amanda?
Sorry.
Then click on your title.
Thank you. With that little technological interlude, let me begin. My role is to introduce our discussion today in terms of why are we talking about the water, energy and food nexus. Fortunately, I will be followed by many far more erudite speakers who will delve into this in much greater depth and spark our discussion through the day. A key reason why we're looking at this nexus between water, food and energy is that as the planet's population grows, as there is increasing wealth in the emerging economies of countries like India and China, the global demand for natural resources is increasing, and so many of those resources are dependent upon water and energy for their production and supply. One illustration of that is this graph prepared by the Global Footprint Network and WWF, which converts most natural resources such as energy, but not water, into habitat hectare equivalents. And essentially what they're concluding here is that the Earth's population is already consuming something like 1.5 times the amount of natural resources the Earth can sustainably produce each year. And so the challenge for us is how to ensure human well-being, how to ensure sustainable development while reducing our call on natural resources. In other words, how can we decouple natural resource consumption from socio-economic benefit? What we're going to do today is focus on 3 particular elements of those natural resources in terms of the supply of water, energy and food. You wouldn't be here today unless you appreciated that the production or supply of any one of these commodities requires considerable input from the others. And so action taken in one of these spheres has knock-on effects in terms of these other sectors. And so what today's discussion is really about is how can we make smarter decisions across these different sectors to avoid perverse outcomes and to maximise benefits for society, the economy and the environment. Now, many people would say, well, isn't this word nexus just another weird piece of academic jargon? And the answer is probably yes, it is. The academic world is very good at coming up with lots of these strange words. My boss at the Australian National University is particularly critical of the word nexus. He says that this is a lazy way of considering how to manage a sustainable society. That what we should be focused on is sustainable development writ large. That we should be considering all the different sectors. And there are many that will come up through discussion today. For example, Neil McIntyre will say that mining should be here. No doubt there are people who would say that health should be here. And that is all true. These are all important sectors that have links to water, energy and food. I think the advantage in talking about the nexus specifically is that these are sectors that have very strong links between them. And if we can find ways, tractable ways, practical ways of managing these particular links sustainably, then there is some hope that we can extend the learning about how to do that to the other sectors in society and take us closer towards that aspiration of having sustainable development that improves well-being for people as well as conserving the environment. I think that Australia is really the place to explore these links. And the reason is that Australia has perhaps the most variable climate and hydrology in the world. And for those reasons, our nation, decade by decade, is constantly put under stress through droughts, through floods, through heat waves, to innovate, to explore new ways of managing the links between these sectors. And so the work that we do here to find ways of sustainably managing these sectors is work that is of great benefit internationally and positions us in a role to be both good global citizens, but perhaps also to benefit through our businesses. However, there's also a risk that in any system that is constantly stressed, that decision makers leap upon the first most attractive technology or approach, a magic bullet that they think will fix their particular problem. And let me give you a few examples to highlight why we can't be relaxed and comfortable and why in Australia we need to think through these issues more carefully. During the Millennium Drought, nearly all the states and territory governments in Australia provided subsidy schemes to add water tanks, rainwater tanks to houses and businesses, and to plumb them into houses. 2 years ago I built a new house, and under the building code in Canberra I was forced to add a water tank even though I did not want to. And while it's true that water tanks do diversify water sources, some of the research coming out of the University of Technology here in Sydney shows that in an average urban environment, the dinky little pumps that are attached to these water tanks that plumb them into, in this case, the childcare centre down the road from me, consume 5 to 6 times more electricity per unit of water supplied. And because most of that electricity is coming from coal-fired generators, it's generating greenhouse gas emissions that are fueling the climate change that's aggravating the droughts that is the reason why we're installing these water tanks in the first place. So this is a classic, if trivial, example of where there are perverse impacts, where governments didn't think through the consequences of their simplistic policy to begin with, and with a smarter system may have made a different decision. The sorts of challenges we face, particularly because I'm assuming that most of us here are from the water sector, but let me just test that. How many of you would say that you're largely associated with the water sector? Okay, so that's most. How many would say your primary affiliation is with the agricultural and food sector? 2, great. And how many with the energy sector? Oh, that's a good number. Excellent. Righto, so we will have some great debate across these sectors today. This just illustrates one of the issues from a water perspective. Most of Australia's cities have tapped out the most readily available water supplies in terms of surface water resources, and as water supply becomes more constrained, as our cities expand, the next set of options in terms of securing supply are things like interventions to encourage greater water use efficiency. They are about water reuse, they are about desalination, and these are increasingly energy-intensive forms of supply. And so the trade-off between water supply and energy consumption is growing. I would argue in many cases the reverse is also true, that there are often increasing trade-offs between energy supply and water consumption. And so if we do want to achieve a sustainable society, we need to find ways of talking across these sectors to ensure that decision makers in business and government in the water and the energy sectors are considering the implications in terms of the other sector. Let me give you a couple of examples. And I think that the advent of climate change really accelerates this challenge, because climate change is forcing all manner of aspects of our societies to consider introducing new technologies. It's driving fairly rapid change, perhaps too frequent change in government policies, and resulting in the rapid deployment of new technologies. So one example is unconventional gas. Coal seam gas is the form of that technology we're most familiar with so far in Australia, but there's equal, if not larger, shale gas deposits that will one day hove into view. 10 years ago, this was virtually not discussed in Australia, but we've seen a rapid expansion of this industry, driven by new technology, driven by a desire to access resources that purport to emit lower levels of greenhouse gas emissions. And one of the knock-on consequences, of course, is that unconventional gas exploitation requires extensive dewatering of particular aquifers and the production of a lot of excess water that's often contaminated and requires treatment. So this is a good example of how a change in the energy sector is really driving dramatic changes in the places that water is used, the kinds of water use, and raises new questions around sustainability. But I'm not only pointing the finger here in terms of the fossil fuel sector. Some of my good friends in the renewable energy sector also need to take a long, hard look at themselves, because there are some renewable energy technologies, there are some climate change mitigation technologies that also consume a lot of water. One good example is concentrated solar thermal power stations. Now, a lot of those haven't been deployed yet, but it is conceivable that with some changes in the economics, they could be. At least one important Australian non-government organisation, Beyond Zero Emissions, is proposing that Australia substantially base its electricity supply and future on these concentrated solar thermal power stations. But of course, the thermal in concentrated solar thermal is water. And where you want a solar power station is somewhere that's very sunny, like the desert. And the deserts don't tend to have a lot of water. And so, as Beyond Zero Emissions are proposing, if you want to stick these sorts of power stations in places like Port Augusta or Goondiwindi or Kalgoorlie, you need a pretty good story about where the water's going to come from and how sustainably that can be accessed. The energy and greenhouse gas sectors in recent years have developed quite a lot of interesting tools to inform decisions about investment, and at least in other countries, governments are actually using them. This may be familiar to many of you, the McKinsey company's least cost abatement curve for greenhouse gas emissions, where each one of these bars represents a particular intervention to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the ones below the axis are profitable now, and the ones on the left there that are profitable are largely demand management interventions. So they're things like saving electricity through retrofitting light bulbs. There is the potential for these to also save water. I mean, in theory, if energy efficiency results in displacement of coal-fired power station or other thermal energy generators, potentially that is water that is freed up for other purposes. Now, if the social, environmental and economic benefits of that could be costed and added to the case for these interventions, then we would have arguably a win-win situation. However, there are also many interventions where there's a win-lose situation. So in the middle there are a number of interventions that involve sequestering carbon in the landscape. And the proponents of interventions like carbon farming often simply haven't thought through how much water is required, and it is a lot of water. And on the right are many renewable energy technologies, some of which are beneficial in terms of reducing water use, others of which require consumption, greater consumption. A number of us in the water sector have been looking to try and find ways of bringing together this information about greenhouse gas emission reduction, energy supply and water. And this rather bizarre bubble diagram is our best attempt to date. The bubbles represent the scale of greenhouse gas emissions that could be abated. And essentially those measures on the left benefit in terms of reduced water consumption. And so those are largely around energy efficiency and low water use renewable energy technologies. Whereas those on the right substantially consume more water. And a number of those are renewable energy technologies and these land-based sequestration measures. So our hope is that this sort of effort can provide tools, metrics, ways of thinking that will enable governments and businesses to understand what trade-offs they're engaging with before they make decisions. Let me just illustrate that in terms of carbon farming, where a number of people who are proponents of this haven't realised that if you plant trees, trees actually need water to grow. And if you pay farmers to plant trees, then that will result in greater evapotranspiration compared to your average pasture, less runoff into rivers, less accession of water into aquifers. Now, there are parts of Australia, like the Mallee regions in the south, where that doesn't really matter because there's no surface water runoff, there's a lot of degraded land. We can plant that land to our heart's content. What the governments have done is put in regulations which says that this sort of carbon sequestration should be banned above the 600 millimetre a year rainfall isohyet. And that includes most of the headwaters of the Murray-Darling Basin just across the divide here from Sydney. But there's a lot of loopholes in those regulations that enable extensive areas to be planted and perverse consequences in terms of reducing runoff. So, for example, if only 10% of the upper Macquarie River catchment just across the divide here were reforested, that would reduce water flows in the Macquarie River, an over-allocated river, by around 17%. So this is a very blunt measure. What it also does is rule out some opportunities. So, for example, in the wet tropics where water's not limiting, it doesn't make any sense to restrict tree planting. And so I would argue that this is another example of where governments, in this case in the former Department of Climate Change, have made rules that haven't really thought through the consequences. And as a result, we've missed a few opportunities for a win-win outcome and also have some perverse outcomes. Another example is in terms of many of the governments around the world setting targets for energy supply from biofuels. Now, the first generation biofuels, fuel crops, of course, require an enormous amount of land to grow it and water. And so there's a direct competition there in terms of food supply. So when countries like Brazil, the European Union, the United States, India and China set these targets, they are intervening in the food sector, potentially driving up food prices and potentially incurring issues such as greater water consumption and deforestation in places like the Brazilian Cerrado. Australia hasn't yet engaged in this industry as much so far, although I learnt on Tuesday that much of Australia's canola crop goes to the European Union for biofuels. So this is an area where Australian governments have an opportunity to make a more informed decision. I talked about the need to decouple natural resource consumption from well-being and economic growth. We have been able to do that in a number of cases in Australia. The cap and trade water market in the Murray-Darling Basin, although there are issues, has substantially disconnected what was a growing consumption of water from employment, from agricultural production. And so now we have a situation where agricultural value is increasing despite the amount of water available being limited. Great benefits during the drought where the trading system enabled water to flow from low value users to higher value users such that with 70% less water during the Millennium Drought, the net present value of irrigated production was at 99% of previous levels. We have to be very careful in this area not to leap upon efficiency unthinkingly as the only answer. There was 200 years ago a British academic, Givon, who was concerned about the great rates of consumption of coal and some of the measures being put in place to burn coal more efficiently and use less of it. And essentially he studied the problem and concluded that actually using the coal more efficiently didn't actually result in less total coal consumption. Because the coal was being burnt more efficiently, it actually encouraged an expansion of production and a greater consumption of coal. We have the same sorts of issues with water. Unless we have a cap and trade water market, such as in the Murray-Darling Basin, measures such as water efficiency risk us consuming more water and depriving other water users. So when we head down this path, for example in the agricultural sector, we need to be clear about whether our water efficiency measures are about enabling an expansion of agricultural production or about conserving water to go back into the river to conserve the environment or supply other users. If we don't target these sorts of efficiency measures carefully, we could well end up with a result we didn't plan for. There are a lot of ways of improving agricultural economic growth, and not all of them require new natural resources. In the interest of time, I won't go through this in more detail. Some of my colleagues at the University of Southern Queensland have looked at this in particular in terms of irrigation in the Darling Downs in Queensland. And they've looked at different sorts of interventions to use water more efficiently that are shown here. And what they've shown is that you can save different amounts of water with different technologies, but those different technologies have different energy requirements, and some of those energy requirements are very high. And so in the final column there on the right, you can see that they have very different outcomes in terms of the profitability of the agricultural production. And I think that what this suggests is that if we want to move into this space of using water more productively, conserving energy and producing more agricultural products, then we need to look into the fine print to make sure that we're choosing the best interventions to maximise profit, to maximise production without perverse impacts. So let me conclude by saying that our challenge today is this age-old problem that we have in governments, in universities, in businesses, that we structure our organisations in silos, usually for good reasons. We want a water department that knows about water and delivers water outcomes. We want an agricultural department that knows about agriculture and delivers food. But we also need these different silos to talk to each other, and so our challenge is how to do that, how to promote better informed, integrated outcomes. I would argue that today we'll largely be talking about institutional solutions and technical solutions. In terms of the institutional solutions, what we really need are markets that, as far as possible, internalise the externalities. So that we have, for example, a water market in the Murray-Darling Basin. We need to be assured that measures such as carbon farming or direct action policies for planting trees also internalise the cost of the water that the trees use. We need more integrated governance institutions, and we'll talk more about that during the day. It's easy to say that we need better governance. What does that actually look like? We also need technically based solutions. So we need better knowledge to inform decisions. We need metrics. We need those data to be publicly available between the different sectors so that we can make informed choices. And we also need new technologies that help us generate good products while using fewer natural resources. So to conclude, there is a growing demand for food and water around the world, and that has great energy requirements. We need to find ways of decoupling resource consumption from social well-being and economic growth. There are inevitably cross-sectoral trade-offs, and so anybody who tells you I've got a magic bullet solution in water or energy is kidding themselves. They clearly haven't looked into it enough to see what the trade-offs, the perverse outcomes are. We need to, as far as possible, predict and manage those trade-offs. And so I think that during the day we'll talk about 4 areas where there are solutions around better information, new technologies, integrating markets, and better governance. Thank you.